My name is Shane Davis. I'm the director of Fractivist.org. I'm here with Dan Leftwich, who is an attorney who's been helping communities all over the state of Colorado enact sensible laws to regulate oil and gas. Thanks, Dan, for coming.
Well, thanks, Shane. You know everything about this issue, so I'll just defer to you for the start.
I think, well, first off, we're actually in Frederick, Colorado, which is in Weld County, also known as Mordor. You can see right behind us that not only is this a recreational facility where they have picnic tables, swing sets, basketball hoops, but an oil and gas well, just 60 feet away from Dan right here. And so what we're seeing is this juxtaposition of the beautiful Rocky Mountains with oil and gas right here in a recreational area where the children that play here and the people that come here to recreate can't protect themselves from this type of oil and gas hydrocarbon poisons.
It's right here, recreation, families, a reservoir, and the air quality, you would expect in this mountain setting would be pure, and just in the time that we've been sitting here, we've already experienced very dramatic air quality spikes where some chemicals, and I'm sure you will explain what they are impacting my throat, immediate smell. And so, this is actually a perfect explanation of why the Oil and Gas Conservation Act in Colorado, which is supposed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, protect the environment, and protect wildlife before oil and gas permits are allowed, why it is completely failing the people, failing the public.
The bigger question, too, is that doesn't the state of Colorado, the Oil and Gas Commission, have setbacks from oil and gas to occupied dwellings, people living in their homes, but also setbacks in recreational areas that wouldn't harm the general public? I mean, there's kids walking right here, 40 feet away. There were two cars that just drove by.
Small child.
Right, so how does this happen?
The Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, the COGCC, has reluctantly increased setbacks that oil and gas operations are supposed to comply with. However, they're full of loopholes, including a massive loophole, which is the existing well loophole, which means if this production facility was already in existence before the new setback requirements were put in place, it's exempted.
Setback loophole.
The setback loophole, which is totally arbitrary if you think about it. All right, the rules are in place to protect the public health and safety. So they set a limit for how close operations can be to the public, to occupied dwellings, right? That limit is supposed to be based on science, right? So some number of feet away in order to provide a cushion so that people are not impacted by this activity. Well, by allowing this to exist, this exemption essentially, they've basically taken arbitrary action. They've said, well, it makes sense when it's a new facility, but not when it's an existing facility, which makes no sense.
So any previously completed well can be re-entered and re-drilled regardless of proximity to a recreational area, an existing home, things like that.
Yes. And actually, the other part of this is, let's say a city wants to actually allow development closer to oil and gas facilities, regardless of the public health risks, they can do that. Right?
So the governor doesn't want to have a hodgepodge of rules and regulations regarding oil and gas in communities all over Colorado, but it already exists. A lot of the communities that I've gone to, I've asked the mayor, the town attorney, asked them, how far can you develop your homes in developing and planning and zoning to completed wells and even active wells? And the town attorney in Erie flipped through his law book and said 25 feet. So what you're seeing, just like down the road in Firestone, you're seeing all of these new home developments developing within 100 feet, 150 feet, or even 50 feet to producing active oil and gas well pads. See, I remember going to the COGCC setback hearings and giving the director of the State Oil and Gas Commission official documents showing that even 1,000 feet away, there were private water wells that had been contaminated by frack gas, which is thermogenic methane, and toluene, which is an EPA-known frack fluid. So giving this information to the state, showing them that their proposed 500-foot setbacks were absolutely inadequate to protect the public in a consistent manner, safety, health, and welfare, it just wasn't going to work. So why would the state of Colorado deny their own failures, absolutely knowing that 500 feet is not safe enough based on the records that they already have showing that even 1,000 feet away, water wells are being contaminated, toxic emissions are flowing downstream, these kinds of things. How does this happen?
It only happens because they're ignoring their own mandate, okay, and the mandate of the legislature to foster the responsible and balanced production of oil and gas resources in the state in a manner consistent with the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare, okay, and the environment. If the second part of that statute isn't met, the first part isn't met. If its second part isn't met, it's not responsible and balanced. It shouldn't be done, all right? In New York, for example, the Commissioner of Public Health in deciding whether or not the state should continue with their moratorium on oil and gas hydraulic fracturing activity, put it pretty clearly. He said, in our state, the time to determine the health and safety impacts of oil and gas drilling is before you issue permits, not after, all right? It doesn't make sense. That's the precautionary principle. We use that principle every day in every aspect of life except when it comes to the oil and gas industry.
Here we are at a recreational facility. If something were to go wrong with a number of people, there are people driving back and forth right behind us. If something were to happen, 2 miles would consume that Safeway store right there, all this traffic on this main road here. How is that safe? And does it appear that the state is negligent in protecting the public?
Well, the state has essentially admitted as much, okay? In the recent 2013 setback rulemaking, it admitted, okay, that these new setback rules are not intended to address air quality concerns, for example, and the COGCC admitted that the rules, they admitted that there are data gaps, that essentially they don't know what the health and safety impacts are, and so they needed a 5-year study, okay? But at the same time, they went ahead and authorized permits, right? And we know that they're authorizing permits at roughly a 95% rate of approval, right? So that just tells you that they are taking the approach to the statute, to the regulations, that says our first job is to determine what's in the economic best interests of the oil and gas companies, because oil and gas development is a major economic factor in our state. And then the protection of the public health and safety, if we can manage it in that balance, okay,
secondary,
we'll do it, right?
Secondary. So I have a bigger, broader question. Throughout the last 5 years of taking on the oil and gas industry or educating the public, on the failures of this state to protect you, it's not just an anti-fracking movement anymore, it's a civil rights movement, because our rights to safety have been taken away from us from the very federal exemptions that the oil and gas industry lavishes in, but it's also supported by the state of Colorado. So the state of Colorado appears to not be protecting our civil rights to safety as well. Any comments?
Yeah, this is how it's supposed to work, right? We have federal statutes, okay? The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act. These provisions are intended to protect the public from this type of pollution and industrial activity. The oil and gas industry, through what's commonly known as the Halliburton Loophole, gained broad exemptions from many of those federal statutes, okay? So then, if the federal government isn't going to protect the public health, the states are supposed to do that.
Right.
That's
right.
why we have an Oil and Gas Conservation Act. That's why we have an Air Quality Control Commission. That's why we have these state statutes.
That's why these communities that you've been working with have been rising up, sort of this groundswell rising, just like the film, to protect their neighbors, to protect themselves and their children and their future.
But the state has exerted preemption through COGA.
Right. Which is an extension of the oil and gas industry. It is
COGA
the
is
same.
just the oil and gas industry.
Yeah.
Private companies asserting the state's rights, all right, over local citizens. That in itself should tell you what's going on here, right? That the industry and the state agency that's supposed to be overseeing them and protecting the public, they are essentially the same entity.
So you, the general public that live in and around anywhere near hydraulic fracturing well pads, cannot protect yourself because the federal exemptions have stripped your civil rights, and now the state is supporting that by not protecting you. So the state appears to be negligent in not protecting you and granting your civil rights to safety. But now you have this huge industry spending hundreds of millions of dollars, not just in Colorado but throughout the United States, saying that fracking is safe and all this erroneous information. So that's what I've been doing the last 5 years, is going through millions of state documents showing the failures of the commission, the Oil and Gas Commission, to protect the people and the environment. So what can communities do? I mean, what can we do? What should we do now that we've got a blue ribbon panel?
Well, this is going to essentially be a process of education first. That's where your role has been critical, and others that do what you do, which is basically opening up the information, vaulting over the propaganda, the moneyed interests, really just greenwashing this activity. Once people wake up to the risks, once people wake up to the health and safety dangers, then they need to understand what their rights are, okay? Preemption, just to be clear, preemption is based on a notion of hierarchy, all right? Supremacy. It's at the federal level, the supremacy clause is the basis. At the state level, it's supposed to be the state is supreme over municipalities when it comes to state interests, or what are called mixed local and state interests. But in reality, in the Colorado Constitution, it's just the opposite. Okay?
Does that explain why we've got an active hydraulic fracturing well pad 60 feet from us in a recreational area?
Yes, because the state has essentially preempted local communities from acting in greater protection of the public health and safety. But if they want to agree to less protection, the state is fine with that.
That's totally fine.
Okay,
yeah.
so this can be existing 60 feet from a recreation area where people are playing basketball. We've seen children in strollers. We've seen families walking by on a path. That can exist because cities can essentially abandon the public health, and the state has no problem with
So
that.
this really explains that we do actually have an active hodgepodge of rules and regulations regarding oil and gas that is not under the umbrella of the COGCC rules and regulations.
But what happens if the state agency isn't doing what it's supposed to do, all right? Where do people go then, right? Well, I can say where they have to go, all right? In the Colorado Constitution, the people are supreme, all right? All political power resides with the people.
People are supreme.
The people have the right of initiative, which cannot, if an initiative like the one in Longmont is enacted, under the Constitution, for a local enactment to protect the local public health and safety, it can't be vetoed by the governor, okay? So, it can't be vetoed by the governor, the executive agency, right?
And that's
How
an article
then,
in the Constitution.
That's in the Constitution. It's
Right.
in Article 5, Section 1, all right?
Okay.
So if it can't be vetoed by the governor, how can it be preempted by an agency that's underneath the governor?
Right.
All right? I mean, does
that show favoritism? Is that clear favoritism?
To me, it shows
Arbitrary?
it shows that the Constitution isn't being respected. And that's what we're going to find out. As these cases in Longmont, Fort Collins, Lafayette, as they go through the courts, and this preemption doctrine is really tested against the Colorado and federal constitutional rights that people have to protect their own safety, their own health, then we're going to find out if the Constitution really means anything.
Right. So now, we've just had an election. Governor Hickenlooper's back in office. We had the poker game with the voices and the signatures of ballot 88 and 89. Jared Polis and Governor Hickenlooper were playing poker. 300,000 people signed ballot 88 and 89, which would increase setbacks and protect water, land, and air, and things like that. So that's gone. Those two ballots never made it. Now we have a blue ribbon panel that the governor handpicked, and I know a lot of people on the panel, and they used to be our friends. They used to help us, and they've kind of sold out. So you have a mixture of, quote, environmentalists, which we don't agree with that, and you have oil and gas people on the panel as well, and they are supposed to provide a working relationship doctrine, let's say, or a white sheet to the governor by February to say, here's how you can operate oil and gas in a safe manner in communities. What's your take on that, and how is that? Is it going to work? Is it going to fail? How should we address that?
Well, as long as it exists, whatever new ideas or new regulations they propose, as long as it exists in the framework that the state has set up with the industry.
So it's a public pacifier, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. It's meaningless. First of all, it was meant to get those ballot initiatives off of the ballot. And when you say they didn't make it, they actually did make it. They had enough signatures. They were going to be on the ballot, all right? That's when the industry and the governor said, whoa, we can't let that happen, all right? So we have to do something to move this beyond this election.
So a little sleight of hand by creating this blue ribbon panel, which is...
That's what I think it is. How many times have we seen this pattern, all right?
Yeah.
Let's set up a blue ribbon commission of industry insiders, politicians who are aligned with the industry, and a few token
people that I worked with in the past, and now they're on there and they're sort of working with the industry even more. And
meanwhile, there are no activists,
none,
from local communities who have actually voted, exercised their constitutional rights to ban fracking, put a moratorium on fracking. None of those people are on this panel. So, I'm skeptical, and the bottom line is we don't need a new statute.
No, and
right?
I think
we have a perfectly good statute that is designed, that was amended to protect the public health and safety. It's not being met. All right. So find a commission that will figure out a way to require the COGCC to meet its own mandate.
And I think that we can use a number of interesting ways of holding the Blue Ribbon Panel accountable and showing them the actual failures of the state in respect to official documents, absolutely showing that the aquifer underneath us right now was contaminated and still being contaminated by fracking operations, active well pads from the fracking industry. So would it make sense to address the Blue Ribbon Panel in a way that clearly gives them valuable and valid information showing the state of failures of oil and gas extraction and development in Colorado, so they can go back to the governor and say, time out. There's nothing safe that's been going on the last 10 years in Colorado. Here are all the failures, and we just need to call a time out. Do you think that the local activist communities should address the Blue Ribbon Panel and hold them personally accountable?
Yeah, I think they should find creative ways to do that, and at the same time put the proper framework for the question, who gets to decide, all right? It's not just that the health and safety of the public isn't being protected. There's the question of who gets to decide what is done in order to protect the public health. If the federal government won't protect the people, states are supposed to. If the state government won't protect the people, city governments are supposed to. If the city governments won't protect people or can't because they're preempted, then the people have the right and the power to do it themselves, all right, through the initiative process. That's what needs to happen. And that doesn't need to change either.
No.
All right? That doesn't need a blue ribbon commission to say, oh, let's come up with some new way of doing that. All right? That's the way it exists right now. It's just a matter of the political will to see that local governments, local communities have the power to
Right.
protect themselves.
So
right?
what I'm seeing is that the oil and gas industry here in Colorado and the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, number one, have no moral structure to their operations. Two, it's arbitrary and it's favoring the oil and gas industry. But again, back to the movie Groundwell Rising, we are seeing this groundswell rising of hundreds of thousands of activists now in Colorado saying, if the state's not going to protect us, we're going to do it ourselves by creating ballot initiatives to either call for a moratorium with a health impact study or ban fracking. But again, it's a civil rights movement that we, the people, are moving forward and saying, you are harming us and you know about it and you need to stop.
And look, we're in a great transition point in world history, just like we transitioned to fossil fuels in the first place, okay,
Right.
from wood, right, and other forms of energy. We're now at another point of transition. Oil and gas companies are in what the author Michael Clare calls the race for what's left, okay?
Sure.
They
Sure.
are going to the extremes of the planet, all right, to find oil and gas. They're going to the extremes near 60 feet away from where people are supposed to be playing, enjoying the fresh air, in order to extract every last possible cubic foot of natural gas and oil. Why is that? All right, because the supply is dwindling. All right, and
Sure.
and at the same time, we have a thriving wind, solar power, geothermal. These industries, if allowed to have just the same kinds of subsidies and boost from the public that's willing to do it, all right? Not forced to do it, but willing to do it, like a republic like Boulder, okay?
Right.
And I call it a republic
It is,
for a
yeah.
good reason, all right? If we can make this transition to clean energy, then we'll find that the protection of the health and safety comes along with it, all right?
Let's look at the spill study that we did many years ago, that 40% of all operator spills just here in Weld County have already resulted in groundwater contamination. 40%, right? Any other industry would have been shut down immediately with that kind of failure rate. The state denied those numbers for years, but just July in 2013, the director, Matt Lepore of the Oil and Gas Commission, sent me an email confirming that 40% of all oil and gas or fracking industry spills have already contaminated your groundwater here in Weld County. How can that be, and why are people not rising up to say, hell no, we need to stop this immediately? But even more important, why isn't the state using their own data to say, we've epically failed you, the people, and Colorado, the environment. We need to shut down until we can figure this thing out. But in the meantime, let's put money into research and development for healthy energy so we don't have to live in this toxic mess when they're gone.
Well, when local communities and residents of local areas encounter a spill, and that, of course, is the tip of the iceberg.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
When they encounter a spill like that, or a leak that is impacting air quality, they report it to the COGCC, and they get a total runaround. They get a Byzantine framework of, talk to them.
Yeah.
We'll take it under consideration. We'll talk to the operator, and then after you've gone through all the process, you find out they fined the operator a small amount, okay? No deterrence whatsoever. So this is why local control is so important, that local communities need to have the right to fine operators, okay, to reimpose the costs of this operation through really a full cost accounting.
Sure.
Okay? And where the harm is irreparable, where the danger is irreparable as to injury to children, as to injury to pregnant women, right? They should be able to stop it. They should be able to ban it. They should be able to put a moratorium on it until there's enough information to find out, is it safe? Can it be made safe? And if it can't, then that's a local community's right. It always has been. Okay.
No, I totally agree. And I think that in 2013, there was roughly 140 billion gallons of toxic industrial liquid waste that was created by the fracking industry. 140 billion gallons in 1 year.
Where's it going?
Well, that's a question. There are tens of millions of those gallons of toxic fluids that have been released in the environment, and they're still there. The industry can't recover those fluids. So in Colorado, we have several 100,000 activists right now, or environmental advocates. All of them need to come together, but we need to grow and grow and grow to invoke those inalienable rights, but also to protect our communities. And the only way we can do this is when we have solidarity, when we have a number of people saying no, and we all rise up, get off of your couch, get out of your car, come to our events, stand up and say no to the governor and the fracking industry. And if we had 1 million people, 1 million people, we have about half of that right now, that say no to the fracking industry. If we had 1 million people, we could control every single election, every single ballot initiative that we want to create in these communities to protect us would pass. It's only up to every single person that are in these communities to rise up and to make this happen. So it's upon us. It's us.
Yeah, so if you, I would say to people, if you see oil and gas activity starting to emerge in your community, if you get wind that the city council in your community is going to decide on whether to issue permits, if you get that or if you get approached by a landman, a broker wanting you to sell your lease, your mineral rights, right? Contact, if you don't have a local grassroots organization in your community, contact a grassroots organization in another community.
Sure.
They'll get you tapped into what's going on at a statewide level in your community.
Yeah.
That banding together is the only way that this is going to happen, all right? And in the process, you find that you have so many people that share your interests and share your values, and this starts to give you power, right? So that's the way this is going to turn around. It's going to be a people-driven movement, and the good thing is you have the right to do it, okay? You have the authority to do it. You just have to exert it. You have to assert it.
There are a lot of leaders in Colorado that would love to have more volunteers and to have those people that really want to get involved. So if you want, you can go to my website, which is fractivist.org. You can go just Google any activist organization in Colorado. There are a number of them. Contact them, get involved, help them, volunteer your time. Even if you can only spend 1 hour of your time, that's one more hour that we have, and we have one more body. So we can do this. It's a matter of bringing people together, using the system the way it's intended to be, and using the state of failures against the state, because we know the oil and gas industry's failed epically against them. But then we can create these ballot initiatives, stop fracking, and we can protect you and the environment.